The stars were quiet in this part of space. They always were. The outer reach was far from the busy trade routes and crowded stations of the inner galaxy. Most ships avoided this region. There was nothing here but empty darkness and the occasional asteroid field. Commander liked it that way. She stood on the bridge of the UNS Relentless, watching the endless black through the main viewport. Her ship was a Hammer-class destroyer, one of the newer vessels in the United Nations Space Fleet. She was fast, heavily armed, and built to take punishment that would tear other ships apart. Like all human warships, the Relentless was designed for one purpose: to fight and win against anything the universe could throw at her. Had served in the fleet for 15 years. She had seen combat against pirates, rogue AI stations, and hostile alien species who thought humans would be easy targets. They had all learned the same hard lesson. Humans were not easy targets. Humans were never easy targets. "Commander," said Lieutenant Park, her communications officer. He was young, barely 25, but he was good at his job. Right now, his face had gone pale. "I'm picking up something on the emergency frequency." Turned away from the viewport. "What kind of something?" "It's a priority one, SOS, ma'am. Universal distress signal." Park's hands moved across his console. "The signal is weak. It's coming from the Arcturus Nebula, about 6 hours away at maximum speed." "Can you identify the source?" Park nodded slowly. His face grew even paler. "Yes, ma'am. It's a medical convoy, 12 ships. They're carrying refugees from the border conflicts." Felt her jaw tighten. They were a peaceful species. They had evolved on a gentle world with mild weather, no predators, and plenty of food. They were kind, intelligent, and completely incapable of violence. The galaxy was full of species like them, creatures who had never needed to fight for survival. Humans were not like them. Earth was what the Galactic Council called a Category 7. It was a planet of extreme temperatures, violent weather, deadly predators, and constant geological activity. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, ice ages. Humanity had survived them all. They had clawed their way up from the mud and blood of their savage world, and they had carried those survival instincts with them into space. "What's attacking them?" asked. She already knew the answer. There was only one hostile power operating near the Arcturus Nebula. "X-Raiders," Park confirmed. "At least 30 ships, maybe more. The convoy is asking for help from anyone who can hear them." The X-Dominion had never fought them personally, but she knew their reputation. They were hunters, predators who saw other species as prey. They raided civilian ships, took prisoners for their fighting pits, and left nothing but wreckage behind. The Galactic Council had condemned their actions many times, but no one had ever done anything to stop them. No one had ever been willing to pay the price. "How many people on that convoy?" asked. Park checked his console. "Based on standard medical ships, I estimate 40 to 50,000 refugees, mostly families, children." Closed her eyes for a moment. 50,000 people. 50,000 innocent lives being torn apart by creatures who saw them as nothing more than sport. "Get me a fleet-wide channel," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something cold and hard as steel. "Channel open, Commander." Took a breath. "This is Commander of the UNS, Relentless to all UNSF vessels in range. I have intercepted a Priority 1 SOS from a medical convoy under attack by X-Raiders in the Arcturus Nebula. I am responding to that signal. Any ship that can reach the nebula within 8 hours is requested to join me." She paused for a moment, then added, "These are civilians, families, children. They called for help and were going to answer. Out." The bridge was silent. Everyone was watching her. "Ma'am," said her first officer, Commander James. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. "We're one ship against 30. Even if other vessels respond, we'll be heavily outnumbered." "I know. The X have never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of." Smiled, it was not a pleasant smile. Then we'll have to show them. The response came quickly. Within minutes, 5 other human warships had answered her call. The UNS Fury, a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to crack a small moon. The UNS Ironclad, an older destroyer whose captain had been fighting since before was born. The UNS Nemesis and the UNS Wrath, twin frigates that operated as a deadly pair. And the UNS Prometheus, a battlecruiser commanded by Captain, one of the most decorated officers in the fleet. 6 ships against 30 or more. The odds were bad. Didn't care about the odds. Set course for the Arcturus Nebula, she ordered. Maximum speed. I want all weapons charged and ready by the time we arrive. Yes, ma'am, said her helmsman. The Relentless turned toward the distant nebula, her engines flaring bright against the darkness. Behind her, 5 other warships fell into formation. They moved together like wolves hunting in a pack, silent and deadly. On the bridge, Lieutenant Park was monitoring the distress signal. His face was tight with worry. Commander, the signal is getting weaker. The convoy is taking heavy damage. I don't know how much longer they can hold out. Then we'll just have to get there faster, said. She turned back to the viewport and watched the stars blur as her ship accelerated. Somewhere ahead, 50,000 innocent people were dying. They had called out into the darkness, begging for someone to save them. The X thought no one would answer. They thought no one would risk their lives for a bunch of helpless refugees. They thought the galaxy was full of prey, waiting to be taken. They had never met humans before. They had never encountered a species that had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. They had never faced creatures who had learned, over millions of years, that survival meant fighting back, that giving up meant death, that the only way to live was to be stronger, faster, and more ruthless than anything that wanted to hurt them. The X were about to learn a very important lesson. In the darkness of space, 6 human warships raced toward the Arcturus Nebula. Their crews checked their weapons, sealed their armor, and prepared for battle. None of them knew exactly what they would find when they arrived. But all of them knew one thing for certain. They were going to make the X regret ever sending that convoy a reason to scream for help. Warlord stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Devourer, and watched his fleet tear the convoy apart. It was beautiful in its own way. The ships were burning, their weak shields flickering and dying under the assault. Emergency pods launched from the damaged vessels, trying to escape, but his raiders shot them down one by one. This was what the X were born for. They were hunters, predators. The galaxy was their hunting ground and every other species was their prey. And was tall and powerful, even by X standards. His scales were dark red, the color of dried blood, and his eyes glowed with the yellow fire of his people. He had led raids across a dozen star systems. He had taken thousands of prisoners for the fighting pits back home. No one had ever stopped him. No one had ever tried. Warlord, said one of his officers, the lead medical ship is requesting permission to surrender. They say they will give us anything we want if we stop the attack. And laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Tell them we will take what we want anyway. Continue the attack. I want every ship disabled within the hour. We will take the survivors back to the Dominion. The officer bowed and turned back to his console and watched another ship explode, its hull cracking open like an egg. The flash of light reflected in his eyes. This was too easy. They had no weapons, no warriors, no way to fight back. They were nothing but frightened animals waiting to be collected. Warlord. This time, the voice belonged to his sensor officer. There was something strange in his tone, something Anne had never heard before. What is it? 6 vessels have just exited hyperspace at the edge of the nebula. They are approximately 40,000 kilometers away and closing fast. And frowned, identify them. The sensor officer's clawed hands moved across his console. His movements were slow, uncertain. I cannot identify them, Warlord. They are running dark. No transponder signals. No identification codes. They are not responding to any communication attempts. Show me. The main flickered and changed. Instead of the burning convoy, it now showed the edge of the nebula. 6 shapes moved against the purple and blue glow of the cosmic clouds. They were dark, angular, and bristling with weapons. They looked nothing like any ship and had ever seen. They looked like they had been built for one purpose only: war. What species builds ships like that? And demanded. Scanning now, Warlord. The sensor officer paused. His scales had gone pale, losing their color. The ships matched no known design in our database, but the hull composition, the energy signatures. He stopped speaking. Finish your report, and growled. The sensor officer turned to face him. His eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. Warlord, these ships are human. The bridge went silent. Humans, and had heard stories about them, of course. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories about them from the planet called Earth. They said humans were savage, violent, and completely without mercy. They said humans came from a world so dangerous that it killed most species who tried to land there. They said humans had evolved to fight, to kill, to survive at any cost. But those were just stories, meant to frighten children, meant to explain why the Galactic Council had placed so many restrictions on human expansion. Surely no species could really be that dangerous. How many weapons do they have? And asked. The sensor officer checked his readings. His voice shook slightly. Each ship carries between 40 and 60 weapon systems, Warlord, plasma cannons, missile batteries, point defense systems. The largest vessel appears to have a main cannon capable of penetrating our heaviest armor. Impossible, and said. Ships that size cannot carry that much firepower. The power requirements alone would be. Warlord, they are firing. The lit up with weapon fire. The human ships had not slowed down, had not attempted to communicate, had not given any warning. They had simply opened fire the moment they came within range. The first salvo hit 3 of N's raiders before anyone could react. One ship exploded instantly, its reactor breaching under the impact of weapons that punched through shields like they were not there. The other 2 went spinning away, trailing fire and debris. Return fire, and roared. All ships return fire. His fleet responded, turning away from the crippled convoy to face this new threat. 32 raiders against 6 human ships. The numbers were clearly in his favor. This would be easy. It was not easy. The human ships moved like nothing N had ever seen. They dodged and weaved through the storm of weapons fire, taking hits that should have destroyed them and simply shrugging off the damage. Their formation was perfect, each ship covering the others, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the space between them into a killing ground. The lead human ship, the one his sensors had identified as the Relentless, took a direct hit to her forward section, and watched the impact, expecting the vessel to break apart. Instead, the ship kept coming. Her weapons never stopped firing. A section of her hull was glowing with heat, but she ignored it completely. That hit should have crippled them, the sensor officer whispered. Their forward shields are down, their hull is breached, they should be retreating. They were not retreating. On the bridge of the Relentless, Commander felt the deck shake under the impact. Warning lights flashed across every console. Somewhere behind her, a power conduit exploded, showering sparks across the bridge. Damage report, she said calmly. Forward shields are gone, reported her tactical officer. Hull breach on deck 7. Automatic seals have contained the damage. Forward battery is operating at 80% capacity. 80% is enough, keep firing. The Relentless pushed forward, her guns blazing. Beside her, the other human ships maintained their formation. The Fury was taking heavy fire, her shields flickering under the assault, but she never wavered. The Ironclad had lost one of her engine pods, but her captain simply rotated the ship to bring fresh weapons to bear. The X had never seen anything like this. Every species they had ever fought retreated when they took damage. Every species tried to preserve their ships, their crews, their lives. That was how war worked. That was how survival worked. But the humans were not retreating. They were not trying to preserve anything. They were pushing forward, taking damage, absorbing punishment that would have broken any other fleet. And they kept firing. "Warlord," the tactical officer said. His voice was barely a whisper. "We have lost 8 ships in the first 5 minutes of engagement. The humans have lost none." And stared at the human ships were cutting through his fleet like a blade through soft flesh. Every shot they fired seemed to find its target. Every maneuver they made was perfect. For the first time in his long career of violence and conquest, Warlord and of the X-Dominion felt something cold settle in his stomach. He felt fear. They had come, and they had come for blood. The battle had been raging for 20 minutes and the X-Fleet was dying. Warlord and watched ship after ship fall to the human weapons. His raiders were fast and deadly, built for quick strikes against unarmed targets. They were not built for this. They were not built to face enemies who refused to break, who kept fighting through damage that should have killed them 10 times over. "Concentrate fire on the lead ship," he ordered. "The one called Relentless. If we destroy their commander, the others might retreat." His remaining ships turned their weapons on the human destroyer. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked across the void, slamming into the Relentless with enough force to crack open a space station. The ship's hull glowed red with heat. Sections of armor plating broke away, spinning off into the darkness. Still, the Relentless kept coming. On the bridge of the human ship, Commander gripped the arms of her command chair as another impact shook the deck. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut on her forehead. She had not noticed it. There was no time to notice small things like pain. "Shields are completely gone," reported Lieutenant Park. His voice was hoarse from shouting over the noise of battle. "Hull integrity at 62%. We have fires on decks 3, 5, and 9. Damage control teams are responding. Weapon status: forward at 60%. Aft batteries at full capacity. Missile tubes are reloading." Nodded. 60% was still enough to fight. "Helm, bring us around. I want our aft batteries facing that flagship." "Yes, ma'am." The Relentless turned, presenting her less damaged side to the enemy. Her aft weapons opened fire, sending streams of metal projectiles across space at speeds that turned them into deadly kinetic weapons. Each hit punched through X armor like a fist through paper. This was what humans had learned to do on there. They had learned to keep fighting when everything said they should stop. They had learned that giving up meant death, and death was not acceptable. Millions of years ago, humanity's ancestors had faced predators with claws and teeth and venom. They had faced ice ages that covered their world in frozen death. They had faced volcanoes that darkened the sky and earthquakes that split the ground beneath their feet. They had faced starvation, disease, and endless violence. And they had survived, not by running, not by hiding, but by fighting back with everything they had. That instinct was still there, buried deep in human DNA. When a human was threatened, something ancient woke up inside them, something that refused to surrender, something that would rather die fighting than live on its knees. The X had never understood this. They had evolved on a world where the strong dominated the weak, where survival meant being the biggest predator. They did not understand what it meant to face a species that had learned to be predators of predators. Aboard the Ironclad, Captain was fighting his ship with one hand, while the other pressed a bandage against his side. A piece of shrapnel had caught him when the bridge took a hit. The wound was deep, and he was losing blood. He did not care. "Target that cruiser on our port side," he ordered. "Hit her engines. I want her dead in space." His weapons officer obeyed. The ironclad's guns roared, and the X-cruiser's engines exploded in a flash of blue fire. The ship began to drift, helpless. "Good, now finish her." Another volley. The cruiser broke apart. "Captain," said his first officer, "medical team is standing by. You need to get that wound treated." After the battle, "Sir, you're bleeding heavily. You could die." Turned to look at his officer. His eyes were hard and cold. 40,000 people on that convoy are counting on us. I will bleed later. Right now I fight." This was what made humans different. This was what made them terrifying to species like the X. Humans did not stop. Humans did not quit. When they decided something was worth fighting for, they would burn themselves to ashes before they gave up. The Fury was surrounded by 4 X-Raiders, their weapons hammering at her shields. Her captain, Commander Sarah, stood in the center of her bridge, calmly issuing orders as explosions rocked the deck around her. "Rotate 45 degrees starboard. Fire all port weapons at the closest raider. Helm, prepare for a hard burn on my mark." Her crew obeyed without question. They had trained for moments like this. They had spent years learning to function under pressure that would have broken other species. "Fire!" The Fury's weapons tore into the nearest raider, ripping through its shields and hull. The ship exploded. "Hard burn now." The Fury's engines flared, pushing the heavy cruiser forward at acceleration that would have killed any species not used to high gravity. She plowed through the expanding debris of the destroyed raider, her forward shields deflecting the worst of it, and emerged on the other side to bring her weapons to bear on the next target. "They're trying to coordinate," said her tactical officer. "The flagship is issuing orders to the remaining ships." "Then we should stop listening," said. "Target their communication arrays, blind them." Across the battlefield, the human ships began systematically destroying the X ability to coordinate. One by one, the raider ships lost contact with their flagship. One by one, they began to panic. On the medical ships, the survivors watched the battle through whatever sensors still functioned. They had been waiting to die. They had been certain that no one would come, that they would be taken to the X-fighting pits and forced to kill each other for entertainment. Then the humans had arrived. Elder Hose was 300 years old. He had seen wars and disasters and countless tragedies. He had never seen anything like this. "They are insane," whispered a young beside him. "The humans, they are completely insane. No sane species fights like that. No sane species takes that much damage and keeps attacking." Hose shook his head slowly. "They are not insane. They are something much more dangerous than that." "What do you mean?" The elder pointed at where the Relentless was trading fire with 3 X-Raiders at once. Her hull was burning, but her guns never stopped firing. "They care," Hose said quietly. "They do not know us, they have never met us. We have nothing to offer them, and yet they came anyway. They are dying for us and they do not even know our names." He watched another X-ship explode under human fire. "The galaxy has always feared humans because of their violence, but we were wrong to fear them. We should have been hopping, praying, that if we ever needed help, they would answer our call." He wiped tears from his large, gentle eyes. "They came, and they are saving us all." The battle was far from over. The X still outnumbered the humans, and Warlord N was not ready to give up. But for the first time in his life, he was facing enemies who simply would not break. And somewhere deep in his predator's heart, he was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. He had attacked creatures creatures who had spent millions of years learning one simple lesson. Never give up, never surrender, and never ever stop fighting until the enemy is destroyed. The X-fleet was breaking apart. 45 minutes into the battle, Warlord stood on the bridge of the Devourer and watched his empire crumble. 20 of his 32 ships were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of debris and frozen bodies. 8 more were crippled, drifting helplessly through the nebula with their engines destroyed and their weapons silent. Only 4 ships remained combat-capable, including his own flagship. 4 ships against 6 humans, and the humans had not lost a single vessel. "This is impossible," and growled. His claws dug into the metal of his command console, leaving deep scratches. "No species can fight like this. No species can take this much damage and keep attacking." His tactical officer said nothing. There was nothing to say. On the human destroyer Relentless was finishing off another raider. The human ship looked terrible. Her hull was covered in burns and breaches. Entire sections of her outer armor were simply gone, ripped away by weapons fire. Emergency lights flickered across her surface where internal systems had failed. But her weapons were still firing, her engines were still burning, and she was still coming. "Warlord," said the sensor officer. His voice was small and frightened. "The human battlecruiser is moving to cut off our escape route." And looked at the tactical display. The Prometheus, the largest of the human ships, had positioned herself between the remains of his fleet and the hyperspace corridor. Her captain had read his mind. She knew he was thinking about running, and she had made sure he could not. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Captain stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the battle unfold. Her ship had taken less damage than the others. The Prometheus was built heavier, with more armor and stronger shields. But she had still fought hard, her guns adding their fire to the deadly symphony of human weapons. Now she had a different job. "Open a channel to the X-Fleet," she ordered. "All frequencies." Her communications officer nodded. "Channel open, Captain." His voice was calm and cold when she spoke. "This is Captain of the United Nations Space Fleet vessel Prometheus. You attacked a civilian convoy carrying refugees. You murdered innocent people for sport. And now you want to run away." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You do not get to run." On the Devourer and heard the message and felt his blood turn to ice. The human's voice held no anger, no passion, no heat. It was simply a statement of fact, as if she were discussing the weather instead of condemning him to death. "All ships focus fire on the battlecruiser," he ordered. "We need to break through her position." His remaining ships turned their weapons on the Prometheus. Plasma bolts and missiles streaked across space, slamming into the battlecruiser's shields. The impacts were powerful enough to shake the massive vessel, to make her shields flicker and strain. But the Prometheus did not move. She held her position, her own weapons returning fire with brutal efficiency. One of the X-Raiders tried to slip past her, angling for the hyperspace corridor. A single shot from the Prometheus's main cannon cut the raider in half. "That ship is a monster," whispered one of N's officers. "They are all monsters," said another. And said nothing. He was watching the other human ships, the ones that had been fighting in the main battle. They were regrouping now, forming a new formation that looked like a closing fist. They were coming for him. "Warlord," said the tactical officer, "the humans are broadcasting again." "I don't want to hear." "It's not a message, sir. It's video." The changed. Instead of the tactical display, it now showed the interior of one of the medical ships. The image was grainy and unstable, captured by damaged cameras, but it was clear enough to see what was happening. Refugees filled the ship's corridors. Families huddled together, children crying in their parents' arms. Medical staff moved through the crowd, treating the wounded, comforting the dying. These were not warriors. These were doctors, teachers, farmers, children. Ordinary people who had done nothing wrong except exist in a universe where predators like the X roamed free. The image changed again. Now it showed the exterior of a medical ship that had been hit early in the attack. The hull was torn open and bodies floated in the void. Bodies. Small bodies. Children's bodies. "This is what you did," said the voice of Commander. She sounded tired, but there was steel underneath the exhaustion. This is what you are. You are not warriors. You are not hunters. You are murderers of children, and we do not allow that." And watched the images, and for the first time he felt something other than fear. He felt confusion. Why did the humans care? They were nothing to them. They were a different species from a different part of the galaxy. They had no alliance with humanity, no treaty, no connection at all. The humans had no reason to risk their lives, to damage their ships, to die for creatures they had never met. But they had come anyway. They had heard a call for help, and they had answered it. Not because they would gain something, not because they were ordered to, but simply because innocent people were dying and they could not allow that to continue. It was the most terrifying thing Ann had ever experienced. He understood predators. He understood conquest and dominance and survival of the strongest. But this willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, this was something beyond his comprehension. "All ships," he said slowly, "prepare to." He never finished the sentence. The Relentless came out of the nebula's gas clouds like a vengeful ghost, her battered hull trailing smoke and sparks. She had circled around during the broadcast, using the nebula's interference to mask her approach. Now she was directly behind the Devourer, her weapons aimed at Ann's unprotected engines. "Goodbye, Warlord," said Commander's voice. The Relentless fired. The Devourer's engines exploded in a cascade of blue fire. The massive flagship lurched forward, her power systems failing, her weapons going dark. Emergency lighting flickered on across her hull as backup systems struggled to keep the crew alive. And was thrown from his feet by the impact. He hit the deck hard, feeling something crack in his side. When he looked up, his bridge was in ruins. Consoles sparked and smoked. Officers lay dead or dying at their stations. And on the human ships were gathering around his crippled flagship like wolves around a wounded animal. "Warlord," gasped his communications officer. The young X was bleeding from a wound on his head, but he had dragged himself back to his station. "The humans they are broadcasting a final message." And pulled himself upright, using a broken console for support. "Let me hear it." The voice of Captain filled the bridge. "Attention X vessels, your flagship is disabled. Your fleet is destroyed. You have lost." A pause. "We are going to let 4 of your ships survive. 4 ships to carry a message back to your dominion. The message is this: they are now under human protection. Any X vessel that attacks them or any other civilian convoy will be hunted down and destroyed. There will be no warnings. There will be no mercy. There will be only fire." Another pause. "Remember this day. Remember what we did to you, and know that this was us being gentle. Next time we will not leave survivors." The channel closed, and stood in the ruins of his bridge, surrounded by the dead and dying, and realized that the universe had just changed forever. They had drawn a line, and anyone who crossed it would face the full fury of humanity. He had a feeling that no one would be brave enough or stupid enough to test that line for a very long time. The Arcturus Nebula was quiet now. Where there had been fire and death and screaming, there was only silence and slowly cooling wreckage. The debris of 28 X-Raiders drifted through space, mixing with the purple and blue gases of the nebula. It would take centuries for the metal to scatter, for the evidence of this battle to fade into the background noise of the universe. Commander stood on the bridge of the Relentless and watched the 4 surviving X-ships limp toward the hyperspace corridor. They moved slowly, their engines damaged, their hulls. They looked like beaten animals, broken and afraid. That was exactly what they were. "Should we escort them out?" asked Commander, her first officer. He had a bandage wrapped around his arm where a piece of shrapnel had caught him during the battle. Shook her head. "No, let them run. Let them tell their people what happened here." The X-ships reached the corridor and vanished into hyperspace, one by one. Watched them go without feeling anything in particular. She was too tired for emotions, too tired for anger or satisfaction or pride. She had lost 17 crew members in the battle, 17 men and women who had died fighting for people they had never met. Their bodies were being prepared for transport back to Earth, where their families would receive them with honors. 17 dead, 50,000 saved. It was not a fair trade. No trade that involved human lives could ever be fair, but it was the trade they had made, and would honor it by making sure those deaths meant something. "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Park, "the convoy is hailing us. They want to speak with you." "Put them through." The flickered and the face of an elder appeared. His skin was pale blue, his eyes large and gentle, and there were tears streaming down his face. Behind him could see other refugees, survivors, people who had been minutes away from death before the humans arrived. "Commander," the elder said, his voice was shaking, "I am Elder Hose, speaking for all the survivors of this convoy. We do not have words to express our gratitude." "You don't need to thank us," said. "We did what anyone should do." "But that is precisely why we must thank you." The elder wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. "No one else came. We broadcast our distress signal across every frequency. We begged for help from every ship in range, and only the humans answered." Felt something tighten in her chest. She thought of all the other ships that had heard that signal, all the other species that had the power to help but chose not to. They had probably calculated the risks, weighed the costs, and decided that 40,000 lives were not worth the trouble. Humans did not think that way. Humans could not think that way. It was not in their nature. "We heard you calling," said simply. "We came." The elder nodded slowly. "I have lived for 300 years, Commander. I have studied many species, learned many things about the galaxy and its peoples, but I never understood humans until today." "What do you understand now?" "I understand why the galaxy fears you." The elder's voice was soft but certain. "And I understand why that fear is misplaced. Humans are not dangerous because of your violence. You are dangerous because of your compassion. You care about things that other species have forgotten how to care about. You fight for ideas, for justice, for protection, for the simple belief that innocent people should not die for the entertainment of predators." He paused, gathering himself. "That is what makes you terrifying. Not your weapons, not your warships, but your absolute refusal to stand by while evil happens. The galaxy does not know how to deal with a species like that." Did not know what to say. She had never thought of humanity that way. She had always seen her people as survivors, as fighters, as stubborn creatures who refused to die. She had never considered that their greatest weapon might be something as simple as caring. "We will remember this day," the elder continued. "We will tell our children and our children's children about the who came out of the darkness to save us. We will make sure the galaxy knows what you did here, and perhaps other species will learn from your example." The channel closed, and the return to showing the nebula. Stood in silence for a long moment. Around her, her crew worked quietly, making repairs, treating the wounded, preparing the ship for the long journey home. They were exhausted, battered, and grieving for their lost friends. But they had won. They had saved 50,000 lives, and they had sent a message that would echo across the stars. 3 days later, the human fleet reached the Galactic Council station at Nexus Prime. News of the battle had spread faster than light, carried by 1,000 communication networks and 1,000,000 whispered conversations. By the time the Relentless limped into port, there were crowds waiting at the docking bays. Aliens of every species lined the corridors, watching in silence as the human crews disembarked. Some of them had brought flowers, the universal symbol of respect and gratitude. Others simply stood and stared, trying to understand the creatures who had risked everything for strangers. Walked through the crowds with her head held high. She did not look at the aliens around her. She was thinking about her dead crew members, about the battles still to come, about all the innocent people in the galaxy who were being hunted and killed by predators who thought no one would stop them. She was thinking about the message she wanted to send. A reporter pushed through the crowd, holding up a recording device. "Commander, can you tell us why you responded to the distress call? You had no obligation to help them. You had no alliance, no treaty. Why did you risk your ship and your crew for a species you had never met?" Stopped walking. She turned to face the reporter and through them, the entire galaxy. "Because they asked for help," she said. "Because innocent people were dying. Because we could make a difference and we chose to make it." She paused, looking at the aliens around her. Species from 100 different worlds, all watching, all listening. "Let me make something clear," continued. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the silent crowd like thunder. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not want to conquer the galaxy or dominate other species. We want to live in peace, to explore, to learn, to grow." Her eyes hardened. "But we will not stand by while innocent people are slaughtered. We will not ignore calls for help. We will not pretend that evil is acceptable just because it is convenient. If you prey on the weak, if you murder civilians, if you hurt children, we will come for you, and we will not stop until you are stopped." She turned and continued walking toward her ship. Behind her, the crowd remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few aliens, then spread through the crowd like a wave. Voices rose in cheers and calls of support. Species that had feared humanity for centuries were suddenly seeing them in a new light. Not as monsters, not as threats, but as protectors. On the other side of the galaxy, the 4 surviving X-ships reached there. Warlord, and broken and defeated, delivered his report to the Dominion Council. He told them about the human ships, about their relentless attacks, about their absolute refusal to surrender or retreat. He told them about the message. The X-Dominion did not launch any raids for the next 3 years. They stayed within their borders, watching, waiting, wondering if they would come for them. And across the galaxy, other species began to do something they had never done before. They began to hope. Hope that if the darkness ever came for them, if predators ever circled their worlds, they could send a signal into the void and know that someone would answer. They had made a promise, and humanity always kept its promises. In the quiet of space, aboard the battered but unbroken Relentless, Commander looked out at the stars and allowed herself a small smile. They had won this battle, they had saved these people, and they had shown the galaxy what humans were truly made of. Not violence, not conquest, not destruction, but an unbreakable will to protect the innocent, no matter the cost. That was the human way, that was the way. And the galaxy would never forget it.